The hall was enormous. It stretched so wide that the far walls were almost lost in a soft blue haze. Hundreds of seats curved around a central stage in wide rings, each one filled with a creature from a different world. Some had 4 eyes. Some had 6 limbs. Some floated in tanks of liquid because the air of this station did not suit them. The Interstellar Council of Sentient Species had gathered today for a routine presentation, but the room buzzed with quiet excitement. The subject of the day was humanity. Senior Assessor Kethvral moved to the center stage with slow, careful steps. He was Velhari, a tall being with 8 long limbs, pale gray skin, and 4 black eyes that missed almost nothing. He had spent 30 years studying new species for the Council. He had written over 200 reports. He was considered the best in his field. Today, he would present his findings on the newest species requesting membership, Homo sapiens, from the 3rd planet of the Sol system, a small yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. He tapped the display panel. A 3-dimensional image of a human appeared above the stage, slowly rotating. There were murmurs across the hall. "This," Kethvral said, his voice calm and flat, "is a human, adult male, average build, 178 centimeters in height, 79 kilograms in mass." He let the room look for a moment, then he continued. "Let us begin with the physical assessment." The numbers appeared in the air beside the rotating figure. Kethvral walked through them one by one, and with each point, the murmuring in the hall grew a little louder. No natural armor, no protective shell, no thick hide, no hardened scales. Human skin was thin enough to tear on a sharp rock. A Dratha hatchling, barely a week old, had skin tougher than an adult human's. No natural weapons. No venom glands, no claws worth knotting, no crushing bite force. The average human bite measured less than 700 newtons. A Dratha adult could bite through solid alloy plating. Sensory range limited. Humans could not see in the dark. They could not hear the high frequencies that most species used for natural communication. They had no magnetic sense, no infrared detection, no ability to feel electrical fields in the water or soil. They were, in sensory terms, almost blind to the world around them. Lifespan short, roughly 70 to 90 years in natural conditions. Some council species lived for 800 years. The Velhari themselves averaged 450. Human lives were barely a blink. Metabolic dependency extreme. A human body required food intake every few hours or it began to weaken. It required regular water or it would begin to die within days. It required sleep, full unconsciousness, for approximately a third of every single day. During those hours, a human was nearly completely defenseless. Reproductive rate slow. A single offspring at a time in most cases. A gestation period of 9 months. Years of helpless dependency before the young could function independently. Kethvral paused. He looked around the chamber. Every face he could read was wearing some version of the same expression: disbelief, pity, and in a few cases, barely concealed amusement. The Dratha delegates sat in the 3rd ring. They were big creatures, broad and heavy, with thick ridged skulls and arms that could lift a ground vehicle without effort. One of them leaned toward another and said something in a low voice. They both made a sound that served as Dratha laughter. Kethvral did not comment on it. He understood the reaction. The data was difficult to argue with. "In summary," he said, pulling up the final classification banner, "the species Homo sapiens represents a Category 3 civilizational profile, high intelligence, moderate technology, significant social organization, but a Category 6 biological profile. Fragile, high maintenance, deeply reliant on constructed tools and group behavior for survival. The official council classification is as follows." The words appeared in large letters above the stage, visible to every delegate in the hall. Vulnerable, high dependency ONTOOLS, and social STRUCTURES. The room accepted this without much debate. It matched what they could see with their own eyes. The council classification was stamped across every datapad in the building within the hour. In the back of the room, a junior Velhari aide named Sen sat at a small desk with a stack of secondary reports in front of him. He was young, only 60 years old, barely past his training period, and his job today was simply to cross-check the data while Kethral presented. He was not supposed to speak. He was not supposed to interrupt. He was there to observe and record. But as Kethral finished, and the applause of various limbs and tentacles and manipulator appendages filled the hall, Sen was staring at one section of the behavioral report with a small crease between his upper eyes. The section was labeled Stress Response Combat Conditions. The data inside it had been collected from historical records that the humans themselves had submitted as part of their membership application. Battles, wars, conflicts going back thousands of years, and buried in the numbers was something that Sen's training told him should not be there. During high-intensity combat situations that should produce maximum fear response in any biological organism, human subjects showed unusual social bonding behaviors, vocalization patterns that matched recreational states, facial expressions associated with positive stimulation. In simple terms, under the worst conditions, humans laughed. Not just a little, consistently, across centuries, across cultures, across every type of conflict the species had ever documented. When things got bad, truly bad, life or death bad, humans made sounds of joy and humor. Sen flagged it in his notes with a small mark and wrote 3 words beside it: statistically inconsistent behavior. He thought about mentioning it to Kethral. He glanced up at his superior, who was now accepting quiet congratulations from a group of council members. He looked back down at his notes. He folded the page and tucked it into his secondary file. He would raise it later. The full behavioral appendix wasn't due for another month. There was time. Across the hall, seated in the human delegation box, Director General Yara Osai sat very still. She had listened to every word of the presentation. She had watched the numbers float in the air. She had seen the Drothai laugh. She had seen the classification banner appear in large, official letters. She did not stand. She did not object. She did not call for a rebuttal. She just sat with her hands folded in her lap, and on her face there was a small, quiet smile. It was not a sad smile. It was not an angry smile. It was the kind of smile that a person wears when they know something that the room does not yet know, and they are content to wait. No one in the chamber understood that smile. Most of them did not try to. She was human, after all. The report had made clear what humans were: fragile, dependent, vulnerable. The council moved on to its next item of business. The stamp was already on the file. The transport shuttle was small and old, and it shook badly during the docking sequence. Sen gripped the seat frame with 2 of his limbs and told himself this was normal. The ECV Resolute, the human military vessel he had been assigned to, was not what he had pictured. He had expected something clean and orderly, the way council ships were kept. What he found when the airlock opened and he stepped inside was noise. Not alarm noise. Not emergency noise. Just noise. Voices talking over each other, equipment being moved somewhere deep in the ship, music coming faintly from a room down the corridor, and a burst of laughter so sudden and so loud that Sen actually stepped backward and bumped into the airlock frame. A human crew member appeared around the corner. Young, short, with dark hair pulled back from her face and a wide grin that showed all of her small, flat teeth. "You're the science observer?" she asked. "I am Sen," he said carefully, using the translation chip embedded near his jaw. "Junior Assessor, Velhari Xenobiology Division." "Great, I'm Corporal Lin. I'll show you around." She turned and walked, clearly expecting him to follow. She was already talking before he had taken a second step. "Fair warning, it's a little loud today. We just got confirmation we're escorting a supply convoy through the Keth corridor tomorrow, and the commander's doing a full equipment check, so everyone's either fixing something or complaining about fixing something. Sen followed her through the corridor and said nothing. He was already recording. His personal data unit was running a continuous environmental log. He noted the sounds, the smells, metal and something warm and sharp he could not identify, and the faces of crew members they passed. Several of them nodded at him with casual curiosity. One young man with a bandage on his forearm pointed at Sen's 8 limbs and said, "Cool," and then went back to whatever he was reading. Sen made a note. Crew shows no signs of anxiety regarding alien presence. Unusual. His quarters were small but functional. A bunk, a desk, a small window that showed the stars outside. Corporal Lin told him meals were at set times and he was welcome to eat in the common area with the crew. He thanked her and spent the first evening alone, reviewing the convoy route data that Commander Wren's office had forwarded to him. The Keth corridor was disputed territory. The Drothi Dominion had been pushing into that zone for months. The official council position was that the human peacekeeping force was there to observe and deter, not to engage. Sen went to sleep expecting a quiet escort operation. He woke up to the sound of singing. It was coming from the common area. He checked the time. It was very early, 2 hours before the convoy departure. He followed the sound and found 6 crew members sitting around the long table, eating. 2 of them were singing something together, a low, repetitive tune with simple words. The others were eating and talking, and occasionally adding a line to the song when the mood took them. No one seemed to think this was unusual. Sen stood in the doorway. He recorded everything. One soldier looked up and saw him. "Assessor, come eat. It's not great, but it's hot." He sat. He did not eat. Velhari physiology required different nutrients, but he watched. And what he watched, he could not quite frame in scientific language. These were soldiers. In a few hours, they would be moving through a war zone, and they were singing about something called a dog who did not want to take a bath. He wrote in his notes, subjects appear unaware of the danger of their situation, possibly a cognitive defense mechanism against anticipatory fear. Recommend psychological screening upon return. The convoy moved out on schedule. 3 human ships, the Resolute and 2 smaller escort craft, flanking a line of slow cargo transports. The Keth corridor was dark and dense, full of floating debris from an old battle that no one had ever cleaned up. It was exactly the kind of place where an ambush made sense. It happened 2 hours in. The sensors lit up. 4 Drothi raiding ships dropped out of cover behind a large debris cluster, fast, close, and already firing. The sound inside the Resolute changed in an instant. The calm background noise snapped into something sharp and organized. Doors slammed. Boots hit the floor at a run. The lighting shifted to a dim red. Sen grabbed the edge of his observation console with 3 limbs and held on. His translator was picking up a constant stream of short words, positions, distances, instructions, confirmations. It was fast, too fast to follow all of it. But what struck him, even in those first chaotic seconds, was that the voices were not screaming. They were not high-pitched with fear. They were loud, yes, very loud, but they were even, controlled, rhythmic almost. He watched the main display. The Resolute had turned to face the attackers directly. That surprised him. His understanding of standard council military doctrine was to protect the convoy first, absorb fire, wait for reinforcement. The humans were not doing that. They were moving toward the threat. Over his earpiece, patched in with permission from Commander Wren, he heard Sergeant Priya Vasquez coordinating a ground response team to a breach point in the lower hull. A Drothi boarding pod had latched on. Sen felt the thud of it through the floor. Then he heard something that stopped all of his thoughts completely. Vasquez's voice, clear and sharp, just after the pod sealed and the breach team confirmed contact with Drothi soldiers on the other side of the door. "All right, let's see what they've got. Open it." And then, just before the door opened, she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a short, involuntary sound of panic, a real laugh, the kind a person makes when something delights them. Sen stared at his audio monitor. The readings were correct. He checked them twice. The breach was cleared in 90 seconds. 3 Drothi soldiers contained. No human casualties. Vasquez's voice came back on the line. Told you, all bark. Outside, the 4 raiding ships had already broken off. The Resolute and its escorts had held the line, kept the convoy intact, and driven the attackers away. Total engagement time, 3 minutes and 51 seconds. Sen sat very still for a long moment. He looked down at his notes. At the top of the page, in neat letters, he had written the word vulnerable before the engagement started, a header for the combat observation section, taken directly from the official council classification. He looked at it for a long time. He did not cross it out, not yet, but he turned the page over so he could not see it, and he started a fresh section with no heading at all. He needed more data. He needed to understand what he had just heard. Sen started with the easiest question first. He pulled up every piece of historical data the humans had submitted in their council membership application. They had provided a great deal of it, thousands of years of written records, audio, video, biological research, social studies. It was more than he could process in a month, but he had a specific search parameter in mind now. He filtered everything down to a single variable. Laughter during conflict, during danger, during situations of measurable life-threatening stress. The results came back in seconds. There was so much of it. Soldiers in underground trenches during a major surface war, hundreds of years ago, trading jokes while artillery shook the ground above them. Medical workers in disaster zones, exhausted past the point of reason, laughing at things that were not funny in any normal context. A ship crew, lost in ocean storms before humanity had space travel, singing loudly together because it was the only thing keeping them from falling apart. Emergency responders who dealt with death every day, known among themselves for a sharp, dark humor that outsiders always found disturbing. It was everywhere. It crossed every culture, every continent, every era. Sen sat back and stared at his screen. In 30 years of xenobiology work, under Kethral, who was the most careful researcher he knew, he had never seen a behavioral trait this consistent across such a long span of time. Most species had behaviors that shifted and changed across generations. The Drothi had completely altered their social bonding rituals over 1,000 years. The Velhari had changed their stress responses with medication and training over centuries. Humans had been doing this, laughing at danger, for as long as they had written anything down at all. He needed to talk to them directly. The first person he asked was Commander Darius Wren. He found him in his office near the bridge, going over route updates for the next leg of the mission. Wren was a tall human with dark skin and short gray hair, and he moved with the quiet ease of someone who had spent a very long time being responsible for other people. He waved Sen into a seat without looking up. "Ask whatever you need, Assessor. That's why you're here." Sen folded 2 of his limbs together in the Velhari gesture of careful inquiry. "I have a specific question. It may seem unusual." "Go ahead." "Are you not afraid, here in this assignment, in the corridor yesterday?" Wren looked up. He did not seem offended by the question. He thought about it for a moment, genuinely, the way someone thinks about a question they haven't been asked out loud before but have considered privately for a long time. "Of course I'm afraid," he said. "I'm afraid most of the time out here. I'd be stupid not to be." He set down his stylus. "But fear is just information. It tells you that something matters, that you need to pay attention. It doesn't tell you to stop. You don't have to obey it." Sen recorded every word. He asked a second question. "And the laughter, your crew before the engagement yesterday, Sergeant Vasquez during the breach, what is the function of that?" Wren was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled a small, tired smile. "You want the honest answer or the official one?" "The honest one." "It keeps us sane," Ren said simply. "When everything around you is trying to kill you and your body is screaming at you to run or freeze, laughing tells your brain that you're still in control, that you haven't broken. It's like a signal you send yourself." He paused. "And it keeps the person next to you from breaking too. You hear someone laugh, even a short laugh. In the middle of a bad situation, it tells you the situation isn't over yet. There's still something on the other side of this worth getting to." Sen went away and sat with that for several hours. Then he went and found Sergeant Vasquez. She was in the equipment bay, repairing a section of her kinetic shield plating. She had a tool in one hand and a short piece of metal in her teeth while she worked. She gestured at a nearby crate for him to sit. "Ask," she said around the metal. He asked about the laugh, the specific one in the breach corridor, right before the door opened, and she came face to face with armed Drothi soldiers. She took the metal out of her teeth and looked at it, thinking. "I don't always know I'm doing it," she said. "Sometimes it just happens. My brain gets to a certain point past fear, past planning, past all of it, and something finds it funny. Like, this is insane, this is completely insane, and somehow I'm still here doing it." She shrugged. "And then you go through the door." "Does it help?" Sen asked. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, it really does. It loosens something up." She tapped her chest. "In here, like a knot that was too tight, and then you can move properly." Sen went back to his desk and spent the next 2 days doing something he almost never did. He went back and read research from other species, not looking for comparisons to humans, but specifically looking for any species that showed the same behavior. He searched the entire Council biological database. 412 sentient species, fully documented. Not one of them laughed in combat. A few species had sounds or behaviors associated with danger, warning calls, threat displays, chemical signals of aggression. Some had behaviors that helped with group cohesion in stressful situations. But the specific act of using humor, of finding something funny in a situation that was actively trying to end you, was completely unique to humans. He pulled the physiological data from the crew's biomonitors from the ambush engagement and ran a proper analysis. What he found made him sit very still for a long time. During the most intense moments, when the Drotha ships were closest, when the breach team was at the door, when every biological alarm in the human body should have been flooding its system with chemicals that caused panic and poor decisions, the cortisol levels in the crew were elevated, yes. That was expected. But they were stable. They had risen and then held steady. They had not spiked into the range that caused tunnel vision, shaking, compromised decision-making. In most species, that range was crossed within 60 seconds of serious mortal threat. Most species were biologically compromised within a minute of real danger. The humans had been in the engagement for nearly 4 minutes, and their performance had not degraded. Some of them had actually shown improved reaction times in the second and third minutes compared to the first. Sen sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a very long time. Then he opened a new message to Kethvral. He wrote the subject line carefully because he wanted it to be exact. He did not want it to sound like panic or overreaction. He wanted it to sound like what it was, a scientific correction. He typed, "Amendment required. We classified the wrong thing." He attached 40 pages of data, reanalysis, and a new behavioral framework he had started building from scratch over the past 2 days. He added a single line at the end of the message, outside of the formal report structure, written in plain language with no technical terms at all. He wrote, "The laughter is not a symptom of vulnerability. It is the mechanism that prevents it." He sent it and sat quietly in the dark of his small quarters, looking out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Drothi Dominion was still reviewing the official council report, still reading the word vulnerable in large letters and planning accordingly. Sen hoped the amendment arrived in time. He had a feeling it would not. War-clad Thresh had the report on his desk for 3 days before the attack. He had read it twice, not because it was complicated, it was not. The Council's official classification was clear and direct. Humans were fragile, their bodies were weak, their lifespans were short. They required constant maintenance and depended entirely on tools and group structures to compensate for their biological limitations. Thresh was a military commander with 40 years of experience. He knew exactly how to read a vulnerability report, and this one told him everything he needed to know. The human peacekeeping force was in his way. The supply lines through the Keth corridor were valuable. The operation was simple. Hit the human ships hard and fast, break their formation, watch them scatter. The whole thing would take less than 10 minutes. He had 3 warships at his disposal. The Resolute and its 2 small escorts were good vessels, but they were outnumbered and, according to the data, crewed by organisms that fell apart under sustained pressure. He gave his captains the order at dawn. The ambush was perfectly placed, 3 ships dropping out of cover at maximum proximity already firing. No warning, no demand for surrender first. Thresh wanted it clean. He opened a communication channel to the Resolute, expecting the human commander to appear on screen looking pale and frightened, asking for terms. What he got instead was a pause. Then a voice, calm, not hurried, and in the background, faint but unmistakable, the sound of music. Someone on that ship was playing music. Thresh stared at his communication officer. The officer stared back. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "They are not responding with a formal communication," the officer said carefully. "They are singing, war-clad." Thresh cut the channel. He pushed the confusion aside. It didn't matter what sounds they were making. The numbers were the numbers. He gave the order to proceed with full engagement. The first 2 minutes went as expected. The Drothi ships had greater firepower, and the humans were absorbing hits. The smaller escort vessels took real damage. The cargo transports scattered as planned. Thresh watched the display and told himself it would be over soon. Then the Resolute turned. Not away, not toward safety, not toward the convoy to protect it. It turned toward his ships, directly, deliberately, with a speed that Thresh had not listed as a possibility in his tactical planning. The human vessel accelerated straight into the center of the formation, firing from multiple angles at once. It was not a defensive posture. It was the posture of something that was not trying to survive the engagement. It was trying to win it. "Recalibrate," Thresh said sharply. "It's a feint." It was not a feint. For the next 8 minutes, the Resolute moved in ways that did not match any standard peacekeeping vessel doctrine. It was fast, unpredictable, and every time Thresh's captains adapted to its previous move, it had already changed. And all the while, the 2 smaller human ships, the ones that had taken damage in the opening, had not retreated. They were still fighting, still coordinating with the Resolute, still functioning. Thresh had fully expected them to fall back by now. The data said they should. Biological compromise under sustained mortal stress, degraded coordination, breakdown of group cohesion. None of that was happening. Then the boarding alarm sounded. Thresh turned to the display. A human pod had latched onto the hull of his second ship, the Dominant Reach. He opened the internal communication channel to the Dominant Reach's defense team and heard them preparing to receive boarders. He watched the countdown to breach. Then, through the open channel, he heard the humans on the other side of the hull. They were singing the same song, the same one that had been playing in the background when he first opened the communication to the Resolute. The same tune, but louder now, overlapping voices, some of them clearly singing it badly on purpose, the melody falling apart in a way that made no sense. The defense team on the Dominant Reach went silent for a full second. In combat, a full second is a long time. A full second is the difference between a held position and a broken one. The hull opened. Vasquez's team came through. Thresh would review the footage later many times. He was looking for a tactical explanation. He wanted to understand the breach sequence as a military maneuver. And it was effective, yes. The humans moved through the dominant Reach's corridors with speed and precision, and contained the defense team within 3 minutes. But what Thresh kept coming back to, what he could not fit into any tactical framework he had ever used, was the expression on the human faces. They were smiling. Not all of them, some were focused, hard-eyed. Completely in the work, but enough of them. Vasquez herself, moving at the front of the team, had the expression of someone who was doing something they were very good at and knew it. The battle ended 11 minutes after it began. Thresh's ships broke off. The Resolute was damaged but intact. The 2 smaller escorts were still operational. The convoy had not been destroyed. No human casualties. Thresh accepted the reality of it with the quiet discipline of a military professional. Then he sat in his command chair and tried to understand what had gone wrong. The data had been correct. Humans were physically fragile. They did require external tools. Their lifespans were short. None of that was fabricated. The council report was not a lie. And yet, when his officers brought the 3 captured Drothi soldiers back from the dominant Reach, the ones Vasquez's team had contained, Thresh listened to their reports. He asked them specifically about the enemy's behavior during the boarding. He wanted to know if the humans had shown any signs of fear, any hesitation, any of the biological breakdown the report had predicted. One of his soldiers, a veteran named Gaughan who had been in 40 engagements, paused before answering. He was clearly choosing his words. "They laughed," Gaughan said finally. "When they came through the hull, one of them laughed." Thresh said nothing. "We froze," Gaughan continued. "Not from the weapon fire. We were ready for that, but the laughing, we did not know what to do with it. In my experience, when an enemy is laughing, the fight is already over. We thought we had made an error, that we had come through the wrong door into a trap." He paused. "We had not. They were simply laughing." Thresh dismissed his officers and sat alone. He pulled up the Council Vulnerability Report and read it again. Every word was still technically accurate. And yet, sitting with the weight of the last 11 minutes in his chest, it felt like a document written by someone who had never once asked the question that now seemed most important of all. Not what can they withstand, but what do they become when they can barely withstand it? He was still sitting there, alone with the question, when the Resolute sent a formal request to dock a shuttle. It carried Sen, the Velhari observer, and 3 human crew members, arriving to oversee the transfer of the contained Drothi soldiers under Council protocol. Thresh went to receive them personally. He wanted to see one of them up close, just to look. Vasquez came through the airlock first. She had a scrape on one side of her jaw and a small rip in the shoulder of her suit. She assessed the dock with a quick sweep of her eyes, the trained, professional scan of someone who was always checking their environment. Then she saw Thresh standing in the receiving area, and her expression shifted into something that was not threatening but was not warm either. It was level, steady, the expression of something that had been tested today and had not broken and knew it and was not crowing about it and was just here. Thresh said without planning to, "What are you?" Vasquez tilted her head. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said simply, "Tired, but we're still here." She walked past him and let Sen handle the formal protocol. Thresh stood in the dock for a while longer on his own. He had a great many things to rethink. The council chamber was the same as it had always been. The same wide rings of seats. The same soft blue haze near the far walls. The same hundreds of faces from hundreds of worlds, gathered in the familiar routine of interstellar governance. But the mood today was different, quieter, more careful. Sen stood at the center stage where Kethvral had stood months before. He was still young by Velhari standards, 60 years old, barely past his training period. He had never given a full council presentation before. His hands, all 8 of them, were very still, because he was concentrating on keeping them that way. Kethral sat in the front row of the observation seats. He had chosen to sit there himself without being asked. He had co-signed the amendment. He had also insisted quietly that Sen be the one to present it. "You found it," he had said when Sen tried to defer. "You present it." Sen looked out at the chamber. He saw the Drothai delegation in the third ring. They were present in reduced numbers today. 2 of their warships were undergoing repair, and war-clad Thresh was not among them. He had submitted a written statement to the council instead, which Sen had read several times. It was short, formal, and carefully worded. It said, in official language, that the Drothai Dominion accepted the engagement outcome and requested a review of the Council's human vulnerability classification. It was the most a Drothai military commander could be expected to say. Sen turned on the display. He did not start with the original report. He started with a single question, projected in large letters above the stage. "What does it mean to be strong?" He let the room read it, then he spoke. "For most of recorded galactic history," he said, "we have measured strength the same way: physical capacity, biological armor, sensory range, lifespan. These are good measurements. They tell us true things about species. Homo sapiens measured this way scores poorly on almost every scale." He paused. "We were correct about that. The original report was accurate." He clicked to the next slide. "What we failed to measure was something we did not have a word for. Something that does not appear in our standard frameworks, because no species we have previously assessed has shown it clearly enough to require a framework." He showed them the data from the engagement in the Keth corridor, the physiological readings from the crew biomonitors, the cortisol levels elevated but stable, the reaction times holding steady, improving in later minutes, the coordination scores not degrading under sustained stress but actually tightening. He showed them the historical data next, hundreds of years of human conflict records, the same pattern again and again across every culture and every era. Groups of humans under maximum stress, performing at or above their baseline capability, sustained over time. "In most species," Sen said, "performance under mortal threat follows a predictable curve. It peaks briefly in the first 30 to 90 seconds of engagement, the fight response, and then begins to drop as biological stress compounds, decision-making degrades, coordination breaks down, social cohesion fractures. This is normal and expected because it is what biology does." He clicked to the next slide. "Humans do not follow this curve." The chamber was very quiet. "Humans have a mechanism, a specific, consistent, culturally universal behavior that interrupts this degradation at the neurological level. They find things funny. They laugh. Not in spite of the danger, but because of it, and in doing so, they regulate their own stress chemistry in real time. They signal cohesion to each other. They keep their social bonds intact exactly when those bonds are under the most pressure." He looked around the room. "No other species in this council's full database does this. Not one." He introduced the term he had spent 2 weeks constructing carefully. He had tested the translation into 17 different council languages before he was satisfied. "I am proposing a new classification metric," he said. "The resilience gradient. It measures a species' capacity to maintain or improve function as conditions deteriorate. It measures what a species becomes under pressure, not only what it is at baseline." He brought up the scale. "Homo sapiens, measured by this metric, does not score in the vulnerable range. It does not even score in the normal range. It scores beyond the current upper limit of the scale." He heard the murmur go around the room. He waited for it to settle. "I want to be precise," he continued. "Humans are still physically fragile by comparison to many species. They are still dependent on tools. Their lifespans are still short. None of that has changed. What has changed is our understanding of what those facts mean in practice." He clicked to the final slide. Fragility at baseline is not the same as fragility under pressure. We made an error by assuming they were the same thing. He stepped back from the podium. The formal part of his presentation was complete. The questions that followed lasted 2 hours. Most of them came from the scientific delegations, biologists and xenopsychologists who wanted to understand the mechanism in greater detail. A few came from military observers representing various species, who were asking the questions that their commanders had sent them to ask. Phrased in careful diplomatic language that everyone understood was really just, "How worried should we be?" Sen answered all of it as plainly as he could. After the session, the chamber slowly emptied. Kethral came and stood beside Sen for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "Good work." It was short. For Kethral, it was the equivalent of a long speech. Sen accepted it with a nod. Director General Yara Os crossed the floor from the human delegation box. She moved unhurriedly, with the same composed stillness she had shown the first day, when the original report was presented and the Drothai had laughed and the word vulnerable had hung in the air above the stage. She stopped in front of Sen and looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for looking closer." "I should have flagged it earlier," Sen said. "I noticed the anomaly in the original data. I delayed." Osai tilted her head slightly. "You got there," she said. Kethral, standing nearby, spoke. He had been thinking about the question for some time, and now he asked it. "When you read our original report, the first one, you smiled. We saw you from the stage. Why?" Osai was quiet for a moment. She looked at the stage where the word vulnerable had appeared in large official letters months ago. The stage was empty and dark now. "Because it was the most human thing in the world," she said. "Someone telling us we can't, that we're too fragile, too weak, too limited." She looked back at him. "That's practically a species-wide alarm clock for us. We've been hearing it for our entire history. It's never worked out the way people expected." She said goodnight and walked toward the exit, unhurried. Kethral and Sen stood in the emptying hall. "I made an error," Kethral said finally. He was not a being who said that easily. Every word of it cost him something. "The framework was incomplete," Sen said carefully. "The framework was mine," Kethral replied. "I built it, I should have questioned it." They left together, walking out into the corridor in silence. That night, alone in his office with the lights low, Sen finished the last page of the amended report. He checked every number one final time. He verified every data point. When it was done, when every formal section was complete and properly formatted, he sat for a long time without doing anything. Then he opened a blank section at the very end, outside the formal structure, past the data and the analysis and the recommendations. He picked up his writing tool and he wrote something that was not part of the official document and never would be. He wrote it for himself, because some things need to be said even if no one else reads them. He wrote, "Do not threaten them. Do not underestimate them. And above all, do not mistake their laughter for weakness. In the entire catalog of this researcher's career, it is the most dangerous sound in the known universe." He set down the writing tool. Outside the window, the stars were very still, and the galaxy was a little wiser than it had been that morning.